Okay, folks, welcome back. I hope everyone had a good break. So this week we are talking about Chapter 14. Chapter 14, Competition. So competition is one of the most important types of biotic interactions among species that shape all sorts of ecological processes that we're interested in. Before we get into it, though, I just want to remind ourselves of this interaction matrix we talked about in the last set of lectures, where we can have the net outcome for each of two species that are interacting, species 1 and species 2, right? And these interactions can either be negative, neutral, or positive for each species, right? And when we were thinking about predation and parasitism, we were thinking about these where one organism consumes another, right? And has a positive impact on its fitness and a negative impact on the fitness of the other. But competition isn't like that. Competition is a process where two species compete for a limited resource, and because of this, each has a negative impact in the presence of the other. A negative impact in the presence of the other, right? So competition is when two or more organisms share a limited resource. This could be space, this could be food, this could be nutrients, this could be light, all these things we've talked about throughout the semester. Right? This is a limited resource. And I want to make sure we differentiate between two key kinds of competition. There's intra-specific competition and inter-specific competition. Intra-specific competition happens within one species. That's what this prefix intra means. Within one species. Interspecific competition is between species. Right, between species. Intra-specific competition, a great example of this from last week are the lynxes competing for limited hair resources, limited food resources, right? When intra-specific competition is high, then the population growth rate goes down, right? Because there's not enough food to go around. Interspecific competition is mostly what this chapter focuses on, and that's competition between species 1 and between species 2. And one of the classic studies that showed this is really cool. So your book goes over this study from A.G. Tansley, looking at a kind of plant called a bedstraw, right? And there's these two species that co-occur on the landscape, one of which grows really well in calcium-rich soils, and another of which grows really well in acidic soils. So these are two plants, in this case bedstraws, that grow best in different environments, right? That was the observation. And at first this seems like abiotic conditions are shaping species distributions on the landscape, right? We've talked a lot about this in other chapters. But one thing that was really cool and what Tansley showed is that when each species was grown alone, they could both grow on both types of soils, right? And so each plant species, each species actually can grow on either soil type. And this is an indication then that the species actually had a larger niche than was realized in nature. And this is a really key concept. The idea of fundamental versus realized niche. So a fundamental niche is the types or the abiotic conditions that a species can exist in. The suite, abiotic can exist in. So this is the whole suite of traits, right? In this case, both plants' fundamental niches were on the calcareous and acidic soils, right? So bedstraw species 1 can grow in acidic soils or in calcareous soils. Alternatively, the realized niche is where species grow in the real world after all of these other biotic interactions that are going on. For example, the competition between these two bedstraws, right? So this is the actual abiotic conditions a species can exist in, a species exists in. And in many cases, this realized niche is a much smaller subset of conditions than the fundamental niche, right? So in the case of the bedstraws, either species can grow in either soil type. But because each of them grows a little better in one of the soil types, they outcompete the other species, and they have narrower realized niches than their fundamental niche would suggest. Does that make sense? So in this case, we have two species of bedstraws, both of which have a slight competitive advantage in a given soil type. And when they're grown alone, either species can grow in either soil type. But when they're grown together, one species outcompetes the other. And this is the idea that species interactions like competition can shape the realized niche and make it different than the fundamental niche. You should check out the picture in your book that looks like this, where it's got like a bunch of little circles. Here's the fundamental niche, but then there's competitors that sort of narrow down to the realized niche right here. Make sure you understand that figure too. That's one we might like to ask about on an exam. Okay, so that distinction is really important, right? This first little mini lecture, we defined what competition is, which is an interaction between within or among species when organisms share a limiting resource where both species have a negative outcome because of the interaction, right? If that competitor wasn't there, both of their fitnesses would be higher. And this competition is really important because it can shape where species live, how abundant they are, and where they can coexist together, why they don't just outcompete each other across the landscape. Does that make sense? Great. Let's jump on to mini lecture 2.